What makes this event unique, however, is the extent to which Eli, Kevin, Sandy, Oscar, and Heather recognize and embrace their roles, not only as conference organizers, but as community leaders. In the last 3 years, this event has hosted summits on mentoring, mental health, and last night, open source contribution. Last year on this stage, we heard Eli announce a new conference, PHP World, an exciting new format that's since been copied by ZenCon, which would unite many of the disparate sub-communities within the PHP family. Each year, they manage to put together an amazing menu of speakers and topics, while still empowering those who have not had the opportunity to contribute as speakers previously. Friends, I'm going to abuse privilege and ask you to join me in thanking and congratulating the PHP Architect team for Tech 2015. Another awesome contribution in a series of awesome contributions. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this very special way. Just a year ago, PHP Tech was the first multi-track conference I had attended, and keynotes were something that let you catch up on sleep between closing Shoeless Joe's and opening the hallway track. It's an honor to be standing here before you. I'm humbled, and you have my appreciation. The Talmud observes, Ein melech bli am. A sovereign does not rule without a populace. Now, I would be the last to compare a public speaker to a king. But the fact of the matter is that without an audience, I'm just a guy up here talking to himself. So I would like to thank each of you for joining me this morning and entrusting me with your time and attention. For those who may not know me, my name is Yitzchok Willroth, though if it's easier for you, you may call me just Yitz. I've found that answering to that tends to keep me drier. You might be more familiar with me as Code Rabbi, for I spend really far too much time in all of the obvious places hiding behind this guy. I build stuff, and over the past few years, I've been fortunate enough to have been asked to help others build stuff. But it wasn't always that way. Software development is actually my third career. Following college, I found myself running the hamster wheel of corporate America, where I worked for this guy. And that continued somewhat predictably for several years, until one day I decided that I was spiritually impoverished. I promptly resigned, sold everything I owned. I had a massive garage sale. I moved to Jerusalem, and I enrolled in a yeshiva, a traditional Talmudic academy, rabbinical school, where I began working for this guy. Now, in case you're vague at this point about the Talmud is the written record of the conversations of the ancient sages, serving as the primary repository for the law, legend, and lore of the Jewish people, and is the essential focus of rabbinic scholarship. As for me, eventually I married, I returned to America, and was fortunate enough to spend over a decade in full-time Talmud study until I came to the slow realization that I was at that point financially impoverished. Now, a computer had been part of my life in one fashion or another since my mother sent me to a summer college for kids program at a local business school when I was 8, where I learned rudimentary basic programming on the TRS-80 Model 1. Yeah, yay old guys. So, faced with the prospect of leaving rabbinical school, and really with little in the way of options, I made the decision to begin working for this guy as a software developer. Now I have to tell you, working for this guy, not so simple. High expectations, limited background, no real formal training, and perhaps worst of all, beginning in my 30s, squarely behind the financial 8 ball, absolutely no margin for error. Fortunately, almost immediately, I recognized numerous parallels between software development and Talmudic study. The Talmud describes rabbinic analysis as maven davar mitoich davar, understanding one thing from within another, teasing out abstractions from concretions. Both disciplines are highly analytic in nature, yet possess an undeniable creative component as well. Both require extended periods of high cognitive load and often an incredible ability to maintain context. Interestingly, I found also that both are vocations whose practitioners also pursue them as vacations. You'll often see someone come home after a long day of toiling in their craft, only to relax by engaging in an activity very, very similar to that which consumed their day. And the similarities, of course, don't stop there. Kent Beck went to rabbinical school, who knew? Now, recognizing those similarities when faced with challenges as a growing software developer, my instinct was to look to the insights and experiences that I had gained in rabbinical school for guidance. Now, perhaps surprisingly, I found that the analogy between the disciplines was more than superficial, that the wisdom of the sages could be readily translated into practical advice applicable to the challenges which I was facing on a daily basis. Ultimately, I found what serves as the title for our session this morning, that everything that I really needed to know, I learned in rabbinical school. So, what can you expect from our session this morning? A software developer talking about the Talmud? A Talmudic scholar talking about software development? Yeah, both to an extent are true, but our session this morning is primarily about advice. After all, why else do you visit the rabbi? In the next 45 minutes, I hope to share with you my experiences, the wisdom of the sages as I've been able to apply it to grow as a software developer. What the Talmud calls yayin yashon bekankan chadashim, aged wine in new flasks. Classic wisdom, but with novel application. Be forewarned though, seldom does one leave a consultation with the rabbi without homework. In deference to the Talmudic emphasis on lilmoid almanas lasois, learning which leads to action, it's quite common to go home with both a plan and a commitment. And this morning will be no different. Our session is very much a participatory sport. At your seat, you should have found a token of my self-promotion, a note card that looks like this. It's my intention to provide you today with nearly 20 specific strategies and tactics, actionable items that you can implement immediately, as well as perhaps a few novel attitudes and perspectives which might just change how you view and relate to the challenges which we face as growing software developers. If at any point you find that one of these speaks to you, you catch yourself thinking, yeah, I think I could do that, I want you to write it down. My goal for the session this morning is that each of you should leave today with at least one item on your card that you feel comfortable committing to implementing, such that your growth as a software developer should be accelerated by virtue of the time that we've spent here together. Let's begin, shall we? The sage Yeshua ben Prachia advises, Aseh lecha rav, v'kana lecha chaver. Cultivate for yourself a mentor. Acquire for yourself a colleague. The wisdom of the sage's advice and its application to the challenges we face should be evident. Our growth as software developers is a journey. And what journey isn't enhanced by the counsel of a wizened guide and the fellowship of trusted companions? Cultivate for yourself a mentor. We work in an industry where the domain knowledge required to function at a high level, it's so vast and fast changing that a Gladwellian 10,000 hours approach to its acquisition is not merely inefficient, it's impossible. I mean, really, who has time for that? The single most effective way to accelerate that learning curve is to receive meaningful, timely, and personal guidance from someone who has trod that path before. Young craftsmen, they learn from journeymen. Doctors serve as interns for many years before practicing on their own. Professional golfers even have swing coaches. Why should our discipline be any different? If you want to level up as a developer, advance your skills, accelerate your career, no matter where you're holding now, there is nothing that you could possibly do that will be more impactful than to apprentice yourself to a mentor that you can learn from, and lean on. So, fair question though, how does one go about cultivating a mentor? Fortunately, in our community, we have an amazing resource which connects willing mentors with potential apprentices. You might be familiar, PHPMentoring.org. Now, it's not foolproof, and it's not easy. I mean, it's simple, really, but it's not easy. You have to extend yourself. But the amazing thing to me is that there are always numerous mentors without apprentices. When I first became aware of the organization, I assumed that there would be a waiting list, that it would take forever to find a mentor. Unfortunately, I was wrong on both counts. I have been fortunate to take advantage of the initiative as an apprentice twice, and both were very powerful experiences, which made an immediate impact on my proficiency as a developer. And when looking back, it was obvious they accelerated my growth tremendously. Now, what if you can't find a fit, though? It's not a panacea. What if your mentor's not hanging out at phpmentoring.org? So that's where this language of cultivating a mentor comes in. Know that the very best mentors, like Yoda here, they're not always openly looking to take on an apprentice, likely because they understand the tremendous commitment involved, taking partial responsibility for the growth and success of another. But the incredible irony is that it's that same appreciation for the weight of the undertaking that makes them reluctant. That's also what makes their mentorship so valuable. So, what is the recipe for mentor cultivation? 3 steps. Identify, interact, and initiate. Identify potential mentors. Interact and grow your relationship with them. And then take an initiative. Identify, interact, initiate. In all likelihood, you already have relationships with potential mentors, be it a seasoned teammate, someone that you know from your local user group, maybe met at a conference, or work with on an open source project. Once you've identified them, grow your interaction with them. Chat them up, ask them questions, do it again, then do it again. Once you've established that history of going to them for advice, now this is the challenging part. Again, simple, not easy. Ask them if they'd consider formalizing the mentorship. Yeah, it does. It takes courage. But you'd be surprised. It's successful far, far more often than you might think. And the potential benefit is well worth it. Now that language of cultivate a mentor, though, it also implies that the mentoring relationship, it need not be formal, nor does it need to be exclusive. I am constantly cultivating ad hoc mentors for myself, always on the lookout for people who have the knowledge and disposition to serve as personal subject matter experts that I can call on if I need guidance in a particular area. Most of them, they're not even aware of it, but they're stored away in my mental Rolodex of who to call in case of an emergency. There's actually a number of them in this room. My friend Gary Hocken, he recently tweeted this about his interaction with Marco Prevetta over some questions he had regarding doctrine. Now, the amazing thing is not that Marco gave Gary 30 minutes just because Gary asked. No, you will quickly learn that this is the rule rather than the exception in the open source community. No, the amazing thing here, shockingly simple really, but the amazing thing here is that Gary asked. Yeah, Gary gets it. The value of a mentor, even a mentor for a minute, is immeasurable. So whether you apprentice yourself formally or you cultivate fields of ad hoc mentors, and they are not mutually exclusive. I suggest that you do both. The primary takeaway is that there are people out there who are able, and in far more cases than you might think, willing, many times very, very willing, to help you accelerate your growth as a software developer. As professionals, it would simply be negligent not to take advantage of them. Acquire for yourself a colleague. The pairing of that advice with that of cultivating a mentor is significant. It means that the key takeaway from the sage's direction is to view people as your most important resources. Now, that is perhaps more obvious in the case of a mentor, but we mustn't underestimate the value of strong relationships and meaningful interactions with our fellow developers in terms of advancing our personal growth. One way which this can manifest for us is via pair coding. The technical benefits of pair programming aside, the opportunity to mind meld with another developer is incredibly powerful. To experience firsthand and in real time how another developer analyzes a problem, breaks it into manageable parts, the decisions and the trade-offs they make when implementing solutions. The benefit of that sort of direct cross-pollination it's immeasurable. And pairing, it's also an incredibly effective and efficient method for learning new skills. Konstantin Karyashov, we know him as Everzet, the creator of Bahat. He recently tweeted this gem. He was able to train in an entire team from a cold start on test-driven development in just 2 weeks because of the power of pairing. Entire team, test-driven development, 2 weeks, leveraging pairing. Konstantin gets it. Pairing works. Know, however, that skill building via pairing, though, is not limited to young developers. Whether it's a new algorithm, a debugging technique, an expanded naming vocabulary, even helpful keyboard shortcuts in your IDE, it's difficult to pair at any level and not walk away from the experience having integrated something new and valuable into your practice. Now, the most obvious place to pair code does remain the workplace. Everyone's pretty much in the same place at the same time, working on the same sorts of things. And I realize that's not an easy sell. But know that even occasional pair coding is tremendously beneficial, whether as a way to onboard new developers, diffuse tribal knowledge throughout the team and elevate your buzz factor, or as a force multiplier, allowing junior developers to easily leverage the knowledge and experience of those more senior. Your teams should be pairing in at least some fashion. Now, if you're unable to introduce even occasional pairing to your team, your local user group is an excellent place to start. Pair programming night. It's a fantastic recurring activity for a user group. And what about open source collaborators? I'm sure that there are people who contribute regularly to the same projects which you do, who would be thrilled with the idea of remote pairing on a feature or two, if only approached. What about specifically reaching out to a colleague to pair code on your next side project? Or perhaps reach out to someone here to pair code with you in this evening's hackathon. Marcelo Jacobus, he even posted an invitation, an open invitation to pair on his blog. Now, I don't know Marcelo, but Marcelo gets it. There's power in pairs. Now, I don't expect you to go this far, but the language acquire for yourself a colleague, it's interesting because there's a certain transactional implication which led me to think outside the box a bit, and I enjoyed my first experience pair coding by actually hiring someone to pair with me. Over the course of a summer, I spent several $1,000s facilitating that pairing, and it is money that I would spend all over again. Quite simply, my gain was worth many multiples of my investment. Now, if you're unable to pair with a colleague, perhaps the next best thing is to engage in regular code review. Most of us, I'm sure, have some sort of code review in the workplace. But think for a moment. How many of us engage in regular code review outside the workplace? Interesting, no? our employers are more heavily invested in code review than we are. Now, I'm not surprised, of course. The fallacy of viewing code review as merely a mechanism for enforcing coding standards or protecting the build, it's unfortunately a common one. The fact of the matter, however, is that those are at best tangential benefits to the practice of code review. The primary beneficiary of code review is the coder rather than the code. And if you're not engaging in regular code review both inside and outside the workplace, you're missing an excellent opportunity for growth. Both the process of having your code reviewed by a peer and by reviewing another's code regularly offer considerable leverage in terms of growing your tactical skills as a developer. Now, again, the obvious question, how does one arrange code review outside the workplace? Again, simple. Find a code review buddy. Offer to review the code of someone if they'll return the favor. Approach someone at your local user group. Somebody that contributes to the same open source project that you do. Somebody you know from an IRC chat room, wherever. My friend Yitzchok, he recently even went so far as to tweet an open offer to review other people's code. Yitz gets it. He recognizes that code review benefits the reviewer as much as the reviewee, and he took the initiative to put himself in a place where he would be able to engage in more of it. Rowan Merwood recently tweeted this open request for feedback and review. I've not yet made his acquaintance, but Rowan gets it. And my friend JT Grimes, she tweeted this in an effort to find a code review buddy after hearing this talk at PHP World. Now, as good tweets sometimes do, this spurred a flurry of tweets, and in 45 minutes, we were able to connect 12 pairs of code review buddies. Today, we're now over 6 months later, at least 4 pairs that I'm aware of are still actively reviewing each other's code. One tweet, 45 minutes, and 4 pairs reviewing each other's code on an ongoing basis. Side projects. Another fantastic opportunity to leverage your peer relationships to foster your growth. The next time that you begin a side project, resist the urge to work on it alone or to immediately open it to contributions from the greater community. Instead, invite 1, maybe 2 others to work with you closely on it. Perhaps form a learning group with a few of your peers. My friend Jeff Caruth, the co-host of the Loosely Coupled podcast, has recently organized the second iteration of the Dev Book Club, leading a bi-monthly discussion as a small group of talented developers work their way through classic texts on software development over Google Hangouts. By all accounts, it's been a tremendous learning experience for everybody in the group. Jeff gets it. And these groups, they needn't even be ongoing. My friend Sean McCool, over the past few months, has initiated a number of ad hoc, topic-focused hangouts, very much like the Open Spaces gathering at conferences. Sean gets it. So if there's an issue that you'd like to explore more deeply, set up a hangout, send a few invitations, and explore it with your peers. Know also that the power of peers, it's not limited to learning. My friend Lee Tingham, the author of the excellent 11k.io podcast, leveraged a peer relationship for accountability. Lee gets it. The possibilities, they're literally endless. But it all begins with your viewing your peers as your most valuable resources. The Talmudic sage Rabbi Hanina reflects, Harbe lomadati meraboisai. Much have I learned from my mentors. Umichaverai yoisem meraboisai. And more from my colleagues than from my mentors. Umi talmidai yoisem mikulon. From my students, more than all of them. Here the sage recognizes the value of both cultivating a mentor and of acquiring a colleague, but suggests that even more empowering is sharing that knowledge with others. Every one of you should be actively looking for an apprentice. Not because it's a great way to give back to the community. I mean, it is. But because it will impact your growth as positively as it does that of your apprentice. You see, the Talmud instructs the teacher, Chanech lenar al pi darchei. teach the student according to their way. If one wishes to truly reach a student, to connect, to teach, perforce they must speak in the student's vernacular. Now the wisdom here, it's not merely prescriptive, but it's descriptive as well. The process of teaching another causes you to view the material as they would, which opens your mind to new insights and greater understanding. And please, don't think that you have nothing to offer an apprentice. Know that by attending a national PHP conference, by attending this session this morning, you are the 1%. The people that you see here and interact with this week, and I'm talking about your fellow attendees as well as presenters. They're not the PHP community. They are the leaders of the PHP community, and that includes each and every one of you. You know far more than you think you know, and sharing that knowledge with others will advance your knowledge even further. Now, if you feel, for whatever reason, that you're not yet ready to take on the responsibility of an apprentice on an ongoing basis, perhaps join me and nearly 7,000 of your fellow developers in taking the mentoring pledge at hackpledge.org to mentor another developer for just 1 hour in 2015. Now, the gambit here is an obvious one. Hack Pledge, me, we're both pretty transparent. We're convinced that after just 1 hour, you'll realize that the investment is an investment in yourself, and you'll do more of it. Now, of course, sharing your knowledge with others in ways which will spur your own growth, it's not limited to accepting a formal apprentice. If teaching isn't for you, perhaps invite a junior developer to work closely with you on a side project. Maybe prepare a presentation for your local user group. Present it at an uncon. Submit it to a conference. You'll be amazed at how much you gain from the process of preparation. My friend Eric Hogue tweeted about the amazing side benefit of growing his own understanding while preparing a talk for last November's True North PHP. Eric gets it. It's also Eric's birthday today, and he'd love to be here. Tweet him out a happy birthday, will you? If public speaking isn't your thing, consider writing instead. The same phenomena exist. You will be the primary beneficiary of the process. Submit an article to PHP Architect. Start a blog. If you already have a blog, blog more. Even put some ideas together in a GitHub gist and, open it up for public discussion. If you're ambitious, maybe write a book. Yeah. My friend Matt Frost, the other co-host of the Loosely Coupled podcast, he recently completed work on a book on OAuth. Now, Matt would be the first to tell you that when that project started, he was not an OAuth guru, nor was he really a writer. But today, about 10 months later, he's both. Yeah, Matt gets it. Again, the possibilities, they're limited only by your creativity and by your inhibition. Learn from your mentors and your colleagues, but grow the most by sharing your knowledge with others. Let's talk about community. The Talmud takes the existence of a vibrant community somewhat for granted, even going so far as to suggest that real learning doesn't exist ela b'chabura, save as part of a group. Few in our community are self-taught, but as a community, we self-teach. The resources which are available to us today are incredible, and that's important because the expectations placed upon us today as developers are equally incredible. The Talmud's wisdom regarding community, it's pretty straightforward. It admonishes us, al tifrosh min hatzibur. Do not separate yourself from the community. The Talmud recognizes that the community is our lifeline, and without it, we are adrift. The application is also straightforward. There is nothing to be gained by blazing a trail if a path to your destination already exists. Wherever possible, that you're able to leverage the community to acquire knowledge more easily or advance your growth, do so. The sage Simon ben Jaima taught, Ezehu chacham haloimid mikol adam. Who is wise? One who learns from everyone. And that's another maxim which is both descriptive as well as prescriptive. It's traditionally understood as a prescription to view everyone that you encounter as having something to contribute. And that's pretty incredible advice on its own. But I think that it can also be understood as a description of the wise approach to knowledge acquisition. Crowdsourcing, learning from everyone. You're already attending a conference, and that's a big one. If this is your first conference, welcome. Soak it up. Come again. If you regularly attend, bravo. Keep it up. You likely already understand their benefit. Conferences allow you to stay abreast of new tools and technologies for an investment of days instead of weeks or months. And that gives you more time to focus instead on growing your skills in the areas more immediately relevant, while still staying ahead of that incredible pace of change in our industry. But regarding conferences, don't overlook the hallway track. The sessions scheduled this week, they're fantastic. But the opportunity to cross-pollinate with such a wide section of the community should not be underestimated, nor should it be missed. Similar in many ways to conferences are your local user groups. While they aren't as high leverage, they serve a very similar purpose, and their reoccurring nature allows you to forge relationships with other members of the community somewhat more quickly and more deeply. Of course, what if you don't have a local user group? So again, maybe not an easy answer, but simple. Start one. Yeah. I recently launched a group in New Jersey called ShorePHP. Now, why did I do that? Well, we had no local user group, and Cal Evans told me to. Yeah. Recently, I'm sure you're aware, Cal's put together an initiative called Nomad PHP, a virtual user group. And each month, he answers the unasked question, what if I don't have a local user group? By saying, so you're it. Start one. I'll tell you, after hearing that for several months, I was kind of tired of it. So I followed his advice, and in doing so fulfilled the Talmud's directive, B'makom she'ein anoshim li'ishtadel li'os ish. In a place where there is nobody, endeavor to be somebody. Cal Evans gets it. As a community person, he innately understands that the more one interacts with the community, the more one gives to the community, the more one receives in return. And don't think that the PHP community is strictly physical. The virtual PHP community is immense. IRC, YouTubes, blogs, Twitter, mailing lists. If you're not connected to the virtual community, you need to plug in. Now, engaging with the virtual community productively does take discipline. If you follow Code Rabbi, you know I don't always have that discipline. But used judiciously, it can be a tremendous, tremendous resource. And let's not forget open source. If you're not contributing to open source, you are doing yourself a disservice. I'm going to let you in on a little secret that they didn't tell you during last night's summit. The open source community does not need any single developer. But every single developer needs the open source community. Developing software with a large group of your peers is a transformative experience. And as professional developers, you need to be part of it. Now, what I hear most often is that people don't know where to start. And I found a wonderful resource recently, upforgrabs.net. It's a curated list of open source low-hanging fruit, issues and features that are perfect for the beginner to ease their way into open source. So if you're unsure of where to start, check it out. Now, of course, that's something of a double-edged sword. You know where to start, but you're out of excuses. for some reason you're not able to connect though with a project, know that you can still gain many of the benefits of participating in open source by simply releasing your own code into the wild. Yeah, that's the beauty of the open source community. You don't have to go looking for them. Give them even a narrow opening and they'll come looking for you. So far though, I've been talking about the PHP community as if it's some monolithic thing with well-defined boundaries. But the truth of the matter is that we're all members of really multiple communities. The PHP community being just one of a concentric set. A person can be, for instance, a member of the Drupal community. And obviously at the same time, they're a member of the PHP community. And without much stretch, we can see that they are also a member of the developer community. But at the same time, that person is a member of a much broader community, the community of communicators and problem solvers. For software development, it's merely a manifestation of communication and problem solving. And the communicator and problem solver, they're a member also of a much broader community, the community of empaths. For problem solving and communication, they're merely expressions of empathy. Now the key here is that while your identification is likely strongest with that innermost layer, your contribution to any community is impacted by your involvement in the community one layer broader. An example is they exist on all levels. The PHP community, we have countless packages which only exist because their creators were involved in the broader software development community and able to take inspiration from projects in the Ruby or Python communities, for instance. And how many RFCs for PHP merely replicate constructs found in other languages? How slowly would PHP advance if the internals group looked only inward and not also outward? And it doesn't stop there. Consider design patterns. Where do they come from? So, software historians will tell you Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham introduced them to the software development community at the Uppsala conference in 1987. But the real question is, where did they draw their inspiration? And the answer is from the work of a member of the broader community of problem solvers and communicators, a professor of architecture, and in this case I mean brick and mortar architecture, Christopher Alexander. Probably not qualified to say this, but certainly Kent and Ward get it. Now, where am I going with all this? There's a point beyond which the identification with a narrow community, it lessens involvement in broader communities. That very involvement which breathes life and vibrancy into that more narrow community. The Talmud refers to this as the proliferation of agudos, factions. And the most interesting thing is that to the sages of the Talmud, they derive the prohibition of factionism, loi tiskoidedu, by logical inference from the prohibition against self-harm. Yeah. For the sages of the Talmud, the logic of not allowing identification with sub-communities to limit one's ability to interact with and learn from the broader community was merely self-evident. Exercise. Take a look at the people around you. Think about them for a moment. People in this room, what do you see? Symphonites, Laravelai, Zendocrats, Arans, Cakists, Falconistas, Selexis, Slamoxin, Drupalos, Magentalogs, WordPressers, Joomloids, Yologents, Lithiumodes, Coderniterellos, Coanitos. No, you're on the wrong track. You see the PHP community. And if you look more closely, you see software developers. And more closely yet, problem solvers, communicators. And if you're somebody who also gets it, you're looking even further, and you see empaths. The advice here is pretty simple. Break out of your shell. Push your own boundaries. If you're a Symfony person, investigate how Zen Framework addresses the same problems. Learn another language, even if you're not going to actively use it. Perhaps attend a polyglot conference. If you work primarily within an object-oriented paradigm, investigate functional programming. And those are just the technical takeaways. Seize opportunities to cross-pollinate with other silos and disciplines within your companies. Explore how other industries are addressing the human issues which trouble you about ours. You see, growth, it works from the outside in. The greater empath that you become, well, the better problem solver and communicator you can be. And the better problem solver and communicator you become, the better software developer that you'll be. And of course, the better software developer, the better PHP developer. And the better PHP developer you become, the more you'll bring to the community that you identify with most closely. I told you, Kent gets it. The Talmud's advice regarding community is that you should consider it an essential resource. Go outside, engage with it as much as you can, but explore everything which it has to offer, and engage with all of it at multiple levels. Finally, let's consider the individual. The Talmud tells the story of Rabbi Akiva, who after being away from home for 12 years to learn in a distant yeshiva, he returns home along with several of his students. When they reach the porch of his home, he overhears his wife answering someone who had questioned her judgment in allowing him to be away for so long in pursuit of his studies. If it were up to me, she says proudly, he could stay another 12 years. The Talmud relates that upon hearing this, Rabbi Akiva and his students did just that. They did an about-face, returned to the distant yeshiva, and stayed fully immersed in their learning for an additional 12 years. Now the question is famously asked, really? They traveled so far, and they'd already been gone for so long. Why didn't he stay at least for a brief visit? And the insightful answer is that, well, the growth of 12 and 12 is simply not the same as the growth of a continual 24. The Talmud's perspective on growth in understanding, and that's really what we're aiming for when we talk about growth as software developers, not growing our skills simply or our knowledges, but growing our understanding, is that mere retention is a myth. Understanding which is nurtured grows, and understanding which is neglected withers. And it comes out an amazing conundrum, that consistency only exists on the side of effort, never on the side of outcome, because a consistent effort produces growth, and anything less produces regression. And that's Rabbi Akiva's logic. He's traveling with his students, so he's immersed in his learning right up to the moment that he overhears his wife. So at that moment, he's faced with a choice. He can either return and continue his growth, or stay and regress. For us, as professional developers, the takeaway, always be coding. There's really no way of escaping it. We can read about it. We can talk about it. We can come to conferences and listen to other people talk about it. But to really grow our craft, we have to practice our craft, and we have to do so consistently. My friend Joe Kaziukenas, he recently extended his personal unbroken chain of coding every day to over 700 days. You can say it with me. Joe gets it. Now, you do have to know your limits. Balance is important. This is not for everyone. But know that consistency is absolutely critical. And Rabbi Akiva's logic, it applies to maintaining context as well. Because context is really just micro-consistency. We're all aware of the impact of context switching and interruption on our productivity. In the workplace, we get really creative. Lots of strategies to prevent interruption. Companies set aside coding-only hours. I know people in large offices that actually code away from their desks. They hide so as to avoid interruption. They have social media blackout periods and private offices and noise-canceling headphones. Ask yourself a question. Does your coding at home resemble your coding at work in terms of isolating yourself from distraction? Just as an athlete builds muscle memory through repetition with proper form, we build mental muscle memory every time we code. So if you want to grow your ability to maintain context and focus when coding professionally, you need to be as diligent about it when coding casually. Your vacational coding habits should resemble your vocational coding habits if you wish them to be strengthened. The next two wisdoms, they source not from Talmudic maxims, but from the traditional methodology of Talmud study. Most salient feature beyond rigorous analysis is verbalized repetition. We'll begin with verbalization. There, the application is simple. Good developers talk to themselves. Yeah. Since verbalization involves different parts of the brain than thought, the process of rubber ducking an understanding, which was previously entirely mental, necessarily increases your understanding. It's not an issue of, well, if you can't explain it, you don't understand it. No. Rather, by explaining it, you come to understand it better. And I found that verbalization also improves concentration. If I'm having difficulty maintaining focus or context, I'll actually narrate as I code. I do my very best Jeffrey Way impersonation, and I describe every line of code as I write it. Yeah, I work at home. But I should do that all the time in every context, because my focus improves and the quality of my code improves as well as I gain additional clarity and insight from the act of verbalization. Another great strategy which works similarly, preemptive commit messages. Writing your commit messages prior to beginning coding. It's essentially named feature branches taken to their logical conclusion. You'll find that your solutions are cleaner and that your commits are more granular by adopting that one simple practice. I've also found that being disciplined about diagramming solutions, even the simplest solutions, prior to their implementation, has an observable impact on the quality of my code. You simply cannot overuse the whiteboard. Don't think, though, that verbalization is a tool only to help you plan solutions or work through challenges. I want you to do an experiment. For an entire afternoon, every time you're about to commit code, anybody see what I did there? An entire afternoon, every time you're about to commit code, the implication being that we're committing code multiple times in an afternoon. Yeah, granular commits, really, really key. But anyway, every time that you're about to commit code, rubber duck first. Explain the implementation that you're about to commit to yourself, like you would to another developer. Better yet, explain it to another developer. Not only will the other members of your team love you, because your commit messages will be more descriptive and meaningful, but you'll be shocked, I think, how frequently the exercise causes you to go back and to reconsider, to take your finger off the proverbial trigger and improve your code before making that commit. A similar practice which can dramatically improve the quality of your code is to be disciplined about reviewing the diff. And here I mean truly reviewing, prior to each commit. Reviewing your changes file by file and line by line rather than in their logical contexts serves as a tremendous sanity check on your implementation, almost magically removing blind spots that you may have been unaware of along the way. It's very much like a one-person code review. Now, regarding repetition, the Talmud observes, Eina doima shana pirku mea l'shana pirku mea ve'echad. One who reviews their learning 101 times cannot be compared to one who reviews their learning 100 times. Now, obviously, the Talmud does not consider repetition to be about retention, because certainly one that has reviewed their learning 100 times retained it. Rather, it's about increased insight and understanding. And the application for us as software developers, code katas. Katas offer us an opportunity to practice our craft unfettered from external influences from the project, stakeholders, deadlines, etc. They are akin to a musician rehearsing or a baseball player taking batting practice. They give us an opportunity to grow our craft in ways which are simply not possible in the workplace. I don't yet know Johann Broadwell, but Johann gets it. Code katas as the programmer equivalent of push-ups. Finally, the Talmud's guidance for the developer, it's not always specific, but it's no less empowering. The sage Hillel is oft quoted, Lo habaishin loimed. The timid does not learn. To get where you want to go as developers, to get where you want to go as developers. And to get there quickly, it takes a little chutzpah. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to challenge assumptions. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And don't be afraid to fail. Ultimately, we are responsible for our own growth. So it's imperative not to allow our inhibitions to slow our advance. The timid does not learn. The Talmud relates another story of Rabbi Akiva, how he was inspired to begin his studies at what was then considered the advanced age of 40, when he encountered a large boulder with a hole bored through its entirety by the steady drip of water from an overhang. From this, Rabbi Akiva realized the value of small beginnings, and that steady effort, no matter how limited, can accomplish great things. The Talmud observes that kol haskalas kashias, all beginnings are difficult. The antidote to difficult beginnings is to recognize that even a small beginning has value, and that steady effort can overcome even the most imposing obstacles. Confession time. This is my first open source contribution. Yeah, a grammar and style edit to PHP the right way. Small beginnings. Our growth as software developers should be understood and approached as we view software development, an iterative process best measured over time. It's not easy, but as the Talmud observes, lefum tzara agra, according to the difficulty is the reward. I'll leave you this morning with the words of the sage Hillel in 3 parts. Im ein li, mi li. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Know that it takes chutzpah to avoid the fate of the timid, that you have to ask questions and ask for help and question assumptions and risk failure, to value small beginnings, to practice as you wish to perform, to leverage consistency. That you need remember the benefits of rubber ducking and other verbalization techniques, of coding katas, and of cultivating mentors. Hillel continues, Ukisha'ani la'atzmi ma'ani. But if I'm only for myself, what am I? It is imperative to interact with the community on all levels, to avoid the trap of factionism, to value learning together with our peers, pair coding, code reviews, conferences, user groups, sharing our knowledge with others, and stepping up to fill a void. Well, at this point, I hope that each of you have at least one item on your card, that you've heard something that you can take away and that you're comfortable implementing immediately to accelerate your growth as a developer. Really, I mean, I've done what I can do. That's it. That's all I've got. The rest is up to you. So I will conclude, as did Hillel, by asking, Im lo yakshav emasai. If not now, when?